Attempts to overthrow Traore are now daily. A man just inches away from Captain Ibrahim Traore was offered $5 million to shoot him in April 2025. He didn't. The president survived after he revealed the conspiracy. However, everything changed after this. Since then, Burkina Faso's security situation has never been better. All forces are now afraid to try a coup. What did Traore do though? Let's investigate. When a nation's president finds out that one of his bodyguards was offered $1 million bribe to kill him, he doesn't simply close one eye as he sleeps. Brick by brick, he reconstructs the castle surrounding him. And with flamethrowers on each wall this time. Captain Ibrahim Traore accomplished precisely that. Traore's reaction after the $5 million assassination attempt was made public was impersonal. It was immediate, cold, and purposeful. He made no request for a speech. He triggered the lockdown ideology, as some insiders now call it. A silent but comprehensive reorganization of all those around him, including priorities, procedures, and people. A new security policy that prioritized monitoring over ceremonial and allegiance above rank was at the center of this change. Reorganizing the Presidential Guard, the very unit that had been infiltrated with treasonous rumors, was his first action. A new level of background screening was implemented, entire teams were reorganized, and new agents were enlisted from unheard-of branches. According to others, even personal histories that traced back to relationships abroad, tribal ties, and school records were investigated. But there were other worries besides physical closeness. Traore had a greater understanding. A leak, a signal, or an open rear door can put an end to a revolution without the need for a rifle. He then looked inward. Phone access in sensitive regions was restricted and communication networks were encrypted. Foreign consultants were discreetly removed from areas where decisions are made, particularly those connected to foreign NGOs or embassies. More significantly, an increased mandate was given to the Office of Internal Counterintelligence, which had been a largely inept bureau under earlier administrations. Spying on outside threats was no longer its sole objective. Now, it had to map the political affiliations of province commanders, officers, cabinet members, and even local police chiefs. Those who were ideologically unaccounted for were either marginalized or given innocuous positions outside of the corridors of power. Then there was the VDP, or Volunteers for the Defense of the Nation, a weapon that Traore had been honing since his first days in office. Officially presented as citizen defense organizations prepared to combat insurgents in isolated regions, the VDP had covertly transformed into an additional line of defense for the state. The VDP were young, rural, impoverished, and intensely loyal to Traore, the man who provided them with uniforms, stipends, and a sense of purpose, in contrast to the traditional army, which had long-standing allegiances to elder elites or French-trained leaders. The scheme led to new forms of VDP mobilization. A few troops were withdrawn from border areas and placed in strategic locations close to important administrative hubs. Others served as silent guardians inside military installations. Traore was constructing more than just a counterinsurgency force. He developed an internal defense mechanism against treachery. In order to facilitate this, the Interior Ministry of Burkina Faso covertly launched new biometric tracking initiatives in the name of nationwide registration initiatives. However, reports indicate that these technologies are being used to track the whereabouts of certain people that the intelligence community has flagged. Digital footprints are being included in surveillance, in addition to physical ones. However, it's important to keep in mind if all of this seems like a dictator enforcing his rule. Denmark is not Burkina Faso. This nation is under siege from both the inside and the outside. Villages are burned once a week by armed groups that support no flag. Through NGOs, foreign powers whisper. The military order in the region is collapsing, and French influence is still there but in the background. Traore's actions in this situation weren't merely a reaction to a personal danger. They represented a full-scale offensive against the unseen foe. Very nothing was said in public. Traore couldn't parade arrests through the streets or host lavish press conferences to introduce his new guard. The deliberate quiet was a strategy to feed the conspirators' dread and deprive them of knowledge. They now knew that the man they attempted to kill had not only lived, but that someone had spoken and someone had flipped. He had never been more prepared, more paranoid, or more protected, and it was successful. The speculations of secondary conspiracies started to fade in the weeks after the plot was thwarted. Once swaggering officers were requesting to be moved to more subdued positions. Important ministries began to follow stricter guidelines. The pace and effectiveness of the security reform were unprecedented in the Sahel in decades, even among international observers, many of whom had chastised Traore for his populist strategies. The problem with fortresses, however, is this. The adversary can enter with just one open gate, regardless of how high the fortifications are. The battlefield is huge, even if Traore's recently constructed walls are tall. It is now more important to ask why he had to protect himself than how he did it. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section.
Viewers, welcome to AMF4 TV. My name is Richard Che. I hope you are fine. Okay, we are talking about how African leaders has to be united by this an influential leader, Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traore. There is a video on social media, especially on our handles, that we have to share it to you for you people to comment on it, on how statements he has been making all these days. We'll keep on updating you on this issue, but don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more of this video as well as similar videos like this. Let's listen to whatever he said and on social media to see, and then also don't forget to comment when you watch this video. Kindly also not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Let's proceed. The battleground Traore inherited must be understood before anyone can evaluate his iron grip. It's the real one, not the idealistic or rhetorical one. A battlefield in which presidents vanish rather than simply lose elections. Where authority doesn't sway. It's always stolen in the middle of the night, sometimes with whispers, sometimes with tanks. Burkina Faso has been ungoverned for the past 5 years. It has been contested. In September 2022, when Traore took over the government, he did not enter a palace on foot. He fell into an abyss. Previously, Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba was the junta leader, had vowed to bring order back after toppling President Kibble, but instead he became the epitome of sluggishness and reliance on outside forces, especially France. The nation continued to bleed. Villages were set on fire by extremists. The military broke down internally, and the populace. They saw another man in a uniform fail to keep them safe. Traore hit at that moment. In a daring, almost bloodless coup, he deposed Damiba at the age of 34, eliciting a rare moment of national cheering. Many viewed him as the youthful, rebellious, Pan-African Thomas Sankara of the new age. However, that moment was short-lived, because the knives began sharpening as soon as he assumed control. There were 4 distinct coup attempts against him between 2023 and 2024. They were verified plots by military insiders, not hearsay or conjecture. A few of these were near the center of Burkina's leadership. Only a few months following his ascent, the first attempt was made. Led by Damiba loyal officers, some of whom were allegedly backed by local players who disapproved of Traore's anti-French views. They misjudged him. Traore publicly reminded the country that not all enemies carry a couronne, and wear beards once the conspiracy was revealed and arrests were made. Some speak French and wear stars. However, the threat did not stop there. The subsequent attempts were more subtle. In one, mid-level officers were assigned to a strategic military installation outside of Ouagadougou. They had been forming coalitions in secret, while mobilizing opposition to forceful measures and delayed salaries. The National Gendarmerie was the source of the fourth, and possibly the most concerning. It was an indication that treason was leaking from even the elite military entrusted with defending the state. With every effort, Traore had to change. Not all of the adversaries had weapons. Some had microphones, while others had briefcases. Western officials started to probe too much. International assistance workers stayed in the wrong places. Formerly silent political families began to test the air once more. It wasn't paranoid. Traore could no longer ignore the resonance of a truth. He was battling more than simply rebels. In addition to the mayhem outside the capital, he was surrounded. Insurgents are tearing apart Burkina Faso. Insurgent organizations have partial or total control over more than half of its land. The state is getting smaller. The flag is no longer flown in several areas. Local leaders, warlords, and militants fill this void by taking on the roles of legislators, tax collectors, and executioners. The fact that every coup plot grew more intense following a significant insurgent victory is no accident. Every defeat on the battlefield didn't only give the rebels more confidence. It was an indication of the government's internal vulnerability. Frustrated by the lack of coordination or the scarcity of resources, military officers started searching for a follower. Additionally, international players, particularly those interested in gold, uranium, and political clout in the Sahel, started looking for a gap that they could exploit. This served as the assassination breeding ground. When a desperate individual with access and ambition can be paid to pull the trigger, you don't need to deploy drones or drop bombs. This is the setting that resulted in the $5 million offer. It was a well-thought-out investment rather than an act of violence. The fact that Traore ruled did not put him in risk alone. Because of the way he ruled, bravely, patriotically, and against the wishes of those who continue to profit from Africa's weakness and division, he was in danger. And your adversaries grow when you lead that way. Traore was aware that this was not the first effort to bribe someone out of $5 million. It was only the first one with a number. Something far more terrible was shown by the 4 coup attempts. A senior officer, a man at the table, a man who salutes, or a soldier in uniform could all be considered the enemy. For this reason, there was no threat addressed by the security change. It was a reaction to a situation where quiet can be seen as conspiracy and loyalty cannot be presumed. He reorganized his guard for this reason. He moved the intelligence apparatus, but why? Why did he use citizens to create a supplementary army? Because the gate is not where the coup begins. The man with the keys is where it all begins. The key bearer himself is now curious as to who is waiting behind the next door. The question reverberates more loudly than any explosion, even if the pistol never fired. Who gave $5 million? Who was willing, able, and self-assured enough to attempt to buy off the guy closest to Burkina Faso's president? They weren't guessing who it was. They were aware of Traore's weakness. Power breeds alone in the calm personal space, not on the battlefield. They were aware of who to approach, when to attack, and the amount of money needed to entice treachery. There was more to this than a petty rebel. It was someone who thought the assassination would mark a sea change for the entire region, not just Burkina Faso. So instead of focusing on the headlines, let's follow the hints. Instead than starting with the foot soldiers, start with the most apparent suspects, internal military figures. But the former leaders who lost everything when Traore took over, the ghosts in medals. Under the previous regimes, many of them had benefited from years of prestige, riches, and unchallenged power. They were immediately marginalized when Traore entered the scene, young, rebellious, and unabashedly Pan-African. No more French-sponsored training seminars, no more backdoor arms transactions, No more soft power from the old world. Burkina Faso is being reoriented towards something new by a young commander who poses a threat to their comfort. Then there is the political elite,